Second video a day. Usually if we talk about power and authority, we use these terms somewhat interchangeably. After all, they basically seem to refer to the very same thing. However, as has been the case with me introducing two terms that seem kind of the same, there is a slight distinction. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce both terms to you, as well as somewhat their particularities, if you will. Okay, so power. Power, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, can be defined as physical strength and force exerted by someone or something, or the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events, as well as political or social authority and control, that is either exercised by a government or given to a person or a body. Thomas Hobbes, who stated in the first part of the Leviathan that the power of a man is his present means to obtain some future apparent good, and it is either original or instrumental. He explains that natural power or original power is the eminence of the faculties of the mind or body, as extraordinary strength, form, prudence, arts, eloquence, liberality, or nobility. Whereas instrumental power, on the other side, is defined as the means and instruments to acquire more, as riches, reputation, friends, and the secret working of God, which men call good luck. These basic definitions have, even though they originate from very different authors and from very different centuries, a few points in common. The focus lies on terms such as control, strength of mind and body, force and by extension coercion, and somewhat violence, as well as on the concept of two opposing positions, namely a group of people who hold power in whichever form, and a group of people or a person upon which power is exercised. Furthermore, power has the ability to shape and alter both behavior and people, to regulate and organize them. However, these definitions, even though they offer a general framework of what power might be, fail to explain between which individual's power is exercised and how power is exercised, which means those in power use to exercise it, or whether there are different conceptions of power than those that I've just named. Before I'm going to explain power, however, I find it absolutely necessary, as Foucault explains in Discipline and Punish, that we must cease once and for all to describe the effects of power in negative terms. It excludes, it represses, it censors, it abstracts, it masks, it conceals. In fact, power produces. It produces reality. It produces domains of objects and rituals of truth. The individual and the knowledge that may be gained of him belong to this production. Power, therefore, is neither negative nor is it positive. It is simply productive. It simply exists. Foucault goes on to describe that power is not something that people have or that people possess and freely wield over one another. Rather, that power is an action to be engaged in. He notes that something called power, with or without a capital letter, which is assumed to exist universally and in a concentrated or diffused form, does not exist. Power exists only when it is put into action. Though power is usually connoted with a hierarchical structure from ruler to subject or inherent to the state, Foucault states that power is distributed both vertically and horizontally between different individuals, either on different levels or on the same level. Consequently, every relationship between individuals or groups may be defined as a power relationship, which always entails a set of actions performed upon another person's actions and reactions. Although violence may be a part of some power relationships, in itself the exercise of power is not violence. Additionally, he states, where there is power, there's always resistance, because power cannot exist without resistance. Resistance does belong to every power relation and manifests itself in very different forms and with very different aims. There is no locus of great refusal, no soul of revolt, no source of all rebellions, or pure law of the revolutionary, but it is a plurality of resistances which sometimes undermine but also often confirm power. This opposition shows that the other as a reference point for confirmation does play a role within power relations. Still, there are other aspects to power. Power has to be continuously exercised in the foundations of society in the subtlest of ways. It has to function outside of sovereignty. It should be light and effective and needs to be permanently visible to ensure its automatic function. Moreover, it has to have a repertoire of instruments and mechanisms in order to be sustainable. The most effective and productive ones are discipline and punishment. Discipline in that regard describes mechanisms of power which regulates the behavior of individuals in the social body by organizing, for instance, space, time, people's activities and behavior. It is also enforced by complex systems of surveillance, which we will come to later, a little later in the seminar. Nevertheless, power as a set of forces that have productive capabilities, that are in constant flux, and that manifest in larger assemblages of material, social, and symbolic relationships, is often attributed to the concept of binary positions, to visibility, to an imbalance of power between those that hold power and those over which it is wielded. Therefore, power is about compliance, secured by the use of force or by others choosing to surrender. By choosing to accept the will of others over oneself, power becomes legitimate. And if we talk about legitimate power, that sort of is a very smooth transition to questions of authority. Because authority is another term that is commonly and somewhat synonymously used with power. Power itself exists, according to Max Weber, in two types. Power as authority, which means legitimate power that is accepted and rightful, and power as coercion, which is illegitimate and forces people to bend to someone's will under the threat of violence and unjust punishment. In this regard, power, that is in German Macht, is defined as jede Chance, innerhalb einer sozialen Beziehung den eigenen Willen auch gegen Widerstand durchzusetzen, gleich viel, worauf diese Chance beruht. Or, in English, power is defined as each chance to exert one's will over someone else despite resistance, whereas authority, and in this case Herrschaft, means die Chance für einen Befehl bestimmten Inhalts bei angebbaren Personen Gehorsam zu finden, or in English, meaning the chance to find obedience for a particular command among a specific group of people. The process of legitimizing power is needed by those in power to be accepted by those subjected to power. There are, according to Max Weber, basically three ideal types of legitimate rule: the rational legal authority, the traditional authority, and the charismatic authority. Rational legal authority is concerned with how political order is perceived as legal in the eyes of the population. It is resting on a belief in the legality of enacted rules and the right of those elevated to authority under such rules to issue commands. Rational legal authority is also maintained through references to a legal code. Traditional authority questions how order can be maintained by the constant reference to customs, traditions, and conventions. It is resting on an established belief of the sanctity of immemorial traditions and the legitimacy of those exercising power and authority under them. The third ideal type that I'm going to address is charismatic authority, and this is concerned with the leader's personality and in how far this personality actually legitimizes his power. It is resting on devotion to the exceptional sanctity, heroism, or exemplary character of an individual person and of the normative patterns or order revealed or ordained by him. Authority, and here I'm going to introduce a second scholar, that is Richard Sennett, whose ideas about authority tie in very well with Weber as well as with Foucault. And authority, according to Richard Sennett, is built on images of strength and does represent the emotional expression of power. It is the attempt to interpret the conditions of power and to give the conditions of control and influence a meaning by defining an image of strength that is solid and stable. Power are in need of people, that is also true, but people are in need of authority as they are ravenous for the comforts of someone stronger. But simultaneously, they also fear authority and rage against the very strength they so desire. However, said fear also stems from the possibility of a disappearance of authority and the fear of what someone could do with power. Still, authority is needed because it provides reassurance and superior judgment, but also has the ability to impose discipline and the capacity to inspire fear. Sennett focuses in his work mainly on the emotional aspect of legitimate power, which he divides into two sections, that is, authority without love and authority of false love. The latter one, that is, authority of false love, he deems is effective because it addresses archaic and infantile images and needs underneath the struggle with power, such as the image of the father. His example is the connection between the father and the boss, a metaphor that joins two words that usually do not belong together. However, due to said joining, both words are transformed, as for instance the term boss or leader is infused with a sense of emotional potency. Therefore, the phrase "the boss is our father" has the power to dominate the affections of others, which the term boss alone could have never had. Formal control of an office or a person over a people is joined to experiences of face-to-face control each person has felt deeply within the family, thus affecting them in an intimate way. And here we could, for instance, look at Harry Potter again. When it comes to Harry, Dumbledore, for instance, exercises, in a way, the authority of false love. He is kind, he's grandfatherly, and this is sort of supported by odd quirks and a, quote, twinkle in his eyes, which contradicts his position as headmaster, rendering him very much approachable and trustworthy. And this is connected with Harry noticing, for instance, that, quote, the castle felt more like home than Privet Drive ever had, because if the school becomes the individual's home, he is more inclined and willing to internalize the authority's gaze, and the authority transforms into a somewhat paternal figure, which cares for those subjected to its power. The metaphor of the guardian or the headmaster in this case, which is joined with the latent paternal feelings, creates a special meaning for its parts, as the term headmaster is infused with an emotional potency which the term alone would have never had. Harry, who prior to entering Hogwarts has never had someone who truly cared for him, latches on to the kindness that Dumbledore bestows on him, placing his trust in him. However, while Dumbledore describes their relationship as, quote, being closer than that of headmaster and pupil, it is unclear whether he really cares for him as an individual, or if Harry is only a means to an end, an instrument to achieve the, quote, greater good. Hogwarts, during the same process, is infused with a similar emotional potency, as the term school is joined with the feelings Harry associates with the term home. Thus, the school and its inhabitants become something worth fighting for. Even though Dumbledore, in this case, exercises power and authority over the student body in his function as a headmaster, and over the wizarding world as a head of the Wizardment or as a former headmaster, it is Harry upon whom Dumbledore exercises most of his power due to the emotional connection between headmaster and a somewhat paternal figure. The need to be cared for, as opposed to being free of authority, is stated to be intrinsic by Sennett. However, this union of power and care is actually utterly false, because it is just decoration and pure rhetoric. Authority without love, on the contrary, addresses no infantile images, but describes images that make no pretense of care. In this case, the person in power is more needed by others than he or she needs them, and can therefore be indifferent towards them. Contrasting Weber, who states that authority needs to be legitimate in the eyes of the subjects, Sennett offers another possibility, as he notes that we feel attracted to people and strong figures we do not believe to be legitimate. A good example for this would, for instance, be Voldemort, who sets himself up as a charismatic leader. However, Voldemort's power is, in the eyes of the citizens, not a legitimate one, as legitimate rule rests on the voluntary acceptance of the person in power. If the subjects have to be coerced, it is because they don't find the rulers to be legitimate. Even this coercion does not necessarily result in legitimacy, as we see in the Harry Potter novels. Moreover, Voldemort embodies authority without love, because he is fully indifferent to those whom he subjects to his power. Nevertheless, whether he takes legitimate figures of authority or illegitimate figures, he confers with Foucault and expresses that resistance and rejection of authority to be an important part of the bond between subject and superior. However, rather than stating that one rebels against authority, he remarks that one rebels within authority. He proposes 3 bonds of rejection: disobedient dependence, idealized substitution, and the fantasy of disappearance. The first bond, documented on the basis of an example, describes the process of not refusing to follow the rules of authority, but proposing an alternative, which cannot be accepted by said authority. It is based on a compulsive focusing of attention of what the authority would want, and it has little to do with real autonomy, but rather with a rebellion on said authority's terms. The second bond sees the authority as a negative model, which is regarded as such by those subjected to it. It draws upon the opinion of these subjects that whatever they do, that is the authority, we, the subjects, want the opposite. However, authority is also a reference and a key point. In a way, a reference point to say why one is actually dependent in the first place. This dependence on authority results in a fear of being cut loose from it, of having no moorings, thus leading to the painting of a somewhat positive picture of authority. The third bond, the fantasy of disappearance, is, as the name indicated, built on a fantasy of disappearance, claiming that everything would be alright if only the people in charge would disappear. Similarly to Foucault, Sennett's attempts at defining authority as legitimate power are based on the assumptions that power is covert, apparent in most social interactions, and confirmed rather than challenged by resistance against and within it. The aspect of surveillance, discipline, and punishment is not perceived as a crucial and vital part of authority in Sennett's work, as the focus of his work lies more on the emotional aspect of power relations, the need for care and recognition by a stronger figure, as well as on the interpretation of authority as a process of interpreting archaic images. Another aspect which Foucault stresses several times in his works, and which Weber actually hints at, is the relation between power and knowledge. Knowledge and the access to knowledge is a vital part in sustaining power. Foucault abandons the tradition that knowledge can only exist where power relations are suspended, and that knowledge can develop only outside its injunctions, its demands, and its interests. Power produces knowledge, and not simply encouraging it because it serves power or applying it because it's useful. Power and knowledge are in all respects mutually dependent. Knowledge is acquired by those in power in multiple ways, for instance through an extensive network of records about the individual, such as birth date, parents, school records, etc., records that may already be seen as a part of a vast and complex network of mechanisms of surveillance. Did I maybe forget to film another Too Long Didn't Watch part and section? Maybe. Which is why you're just getting the audio comment, while you will probably only see a Too Long Didn't Read sign on your screen. So the takeaways from this video should be, first, that power and authority are two different terms that are used quite differently and can be quite differently defined. That, two, power and authority have legal, rational, traditional, and emotional implications. That 3, power and knowledge are absolutely dependent on one another, because those in power usually accumulate a certain knowledge about others. And that 4, and this is the most important part, that power isn't a negative or a positive term, but that it is something that simply exists in every social relationship that we have, whether it's hierarchically structured or vertically structured.